Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our slow march of the penguins through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book, period by period. We spent a long time in the ancient world. We are bouncing around now, but we are mostly in what has often been called the Dark Ages. Of course, it wasn't dark, and it was full of antic intellectual development and bits and spurts, and a lot of it, by the nature of the period, had to be governed by the Christian church, who gathered into its own hands power, money, and also the means of intellectual production, to go all Marxist on you. And so that a large number of the books that we start to see from this period are in some way connected with the Christian church or written by its votaries. We saw Bishop Eusebius, and today we have another bishop. Today we have Gregory of Tours, who wrote a history of the Franks, starting with Let There Be Light, starting with the very beginning of creation. He wrote a lot of other books. He was a prolific author, and here we have the benefits and drawbacks of that kind of move of literature under the aegis of the church. The church, of course, is a far better steward of the written work than the haphazard commercial nature of the ancient world. Because the church has the mechanisms at its disposal to copy works and to store them and to safeguard them. Unfortunately, there's a negative to that as well, which is that the Christian church that we're talking about here has been, up until just about yesterday, the world's most enthusiastic proponent of banning books, burning them, burning their authors. So it's difficult to say in the grand balance of humanity's intellectual inheritance whether it has received more from Christianity or lost more because of Christianity. And that's hardly a question that we can address here. One way or another, the fact is that there was never going to be any real doubt that Gregory of Tours' histories, that his books, would perish. We sort of move away from that just ubiquitous worry that we had in the ancient world, where you have somebody like Livy who was writing a famous book in multiple parts, and everybody at the time knew who he was, and they knew his book was famous. But the copying wasn't a state thing. It certainly wasn't a cult thing of Jupiter, Optimus, and Best. It was haphazard. It was left to the market, to the vagaries of the reading public, to various publishing houses. Whereas the literature of the church, that isn't true. So we start to get things like this. If Gregory had written, well, this is a history. This is basically a history of humanity, and there were plenty of those in the Roman day that we don't have anything of. We're lucky if we know the name of their author. But in this case, we have lots of this author's work, and the history of the Franks is great fun. It is great fun. I talked to you a little bit about Bishop Eusebius yesterday. I mentioned that he was on topic the whole time. And his topic is the living word of God moving through the governments and dispositions of men towards its eventual fulfillment. And that is interesting. Eusebius can't help but drop all sorts of interesting historical tidbits along the way. But following that theme, it can sometimes grind. It can sometimes be a little dull. And it doesn't help any that Eusebius is himself a fairly dull author. Gregory is completely different, much closer to the attitude, to the wide plenitude of interest that we saw in Bede. Gregory is much more interested in humans, and he's willing to follow down stories, and also he has a better through narrative, if you want to put it that way, which is, in this particular book, the history of the Franks, the history of specifically the history of the Merovingian rulers that he knew, and that knew him, and that ruled his world. That's a much more promising ground for any kind of book, especially a work that purports to be a work of history. And it shows. On virtually every page of this book has some fantastic anecdote, some fantastic story that you can tell, again, like with Eusebius, you can tell that Gregory probably meant it in one way, but you can still take it in another way. It's still enjoyable to read. He takes you through the lives and the anecdotes and the gossip that hovered around a lot of the rulers of his day. As one in particular that he views, he describes King Childebert's life as one long debauch, and there are many passages about that. But the one, uh, uh, it's not Childebert, it's Childeric. It's Childeric that is, well, he hates Childebert, but it doesn't really matter. Like for instance, when Childeric is taking a bride, Queen Basina, uh, uh, she said, we're told that she deserted her husband and joined Childeric. He questioned her closely as to why she had come from far away to be with him, and she's said to have answered. Now, see, this is very Herodotean. This is Gregory saying, "I don't know this. I have not spoken to any witnesses. I have not read any documents. The rumor is that this is what she said." So you know that she probably didn't, but it's entertaining anyway. The quote is, "I know that you are a strong man, and I recognize ability when I see it. I have therefore come to live with you. You can be sure that if I knew of anyone else, even far across the sea, who was more capable than you, I should have sought him out and gone to live with him instead." And we're told that this pleased Childeric, that this kind of attitude pleased him. But it's not so much, the book is full of anecdotes about Childebert and Childeric and the women in their lives. But I want to read you another anecdote. It's a little bit long. It's a whole paragraph here. This translation is by Lewis Thorpe, and I think this is from almost 70 years ago, so there are slight stiffnesses. I don't think we're ever going to get another Gregory of Tours translation into English anytime soon, so I'm not holding my breath. This is from 1974. And let's see here. At the time when Sidonius was living a saintly life here on earth and was completely devoted to the service of the Lord, 2 priests rebelled against him. They removed him from all control over the property of his church, reduced him to a very straitened way of life, and submitted him to every kind of contumely. And see, contumely that's a Shakespearean word, for Pete's sake. That even though that is a close translation, I wouldn't have used it. In a modern translation, I wouldn't use it. Verbal abuse will work just fine. It adds an extra word, but it conveys the meaning without having your reader need to go to a dictionary. But anyway, God in his clemency did not permit this insult to go long unpunished. Why did God permit it to happen at all? Why did he permit it to happen for any amount of time, much less wait a while? Why did he wait until Sidonius was in straitened conditions? Why did the 2 priests ever take it into their heart to persecute this godly man? No idea. But once God got the memo, he in his clemency did not permit this insult to go long unpunished. One of these 2 insidious men, who was unworthy to be called by the name of priest, had threatened the night before to drag Sidonius out of his own church. When he got up the next morning on hearing the bell and was called to matins, this is the priest, not Sidonius. When the priest, the one who'd made the threat, got up the next morning on hearing the bell which called him to matins, this man was full of spite against the holy man of God, and was busy turning over in his mind how he could best carry out a plan which he had formed the previous evening. He went off to the lavatory, and while he was occupied in emptying his bowels, he lost his soul instead. A boy was waiting outside with a candle, expecting his master to emerge at any moment. Day dawned. His accomplice, the other priest, sent someone to see what had happened. "Come quickly," said the messenger. "Don't hang about in there any longer. We must do together what we planned yesterday." He's outside the lavatory, saying, "What are you waiting around in there for?" The dead man gave no answer. The boy lifted up the curtain of the lavatory and found his master dead on the seat. From this we may deduce that this man was guilty. Now, I'm not 100% sure that Gregory wasn't having as much fun as I'm having when I read that passage. It's entirely possible that he was. He was a man of the world, despite his rather cloistered vocation. He was a prolific listener to people, a prolific observer, and there's something about that kind of incident and the one with Childebert and many others throughout this book. They seem to have just too impeccable narrative timing to be done with complete po-faced piety. I find myself unwilling to believe in that piety completely when it comes to stories like that, and this book is full of those. So your Penguin Classic for today is a recommend. I don't know if Penguin still makes the History of the Franks. I don't know that anybody in a popular press would ever make a new edition of this, make a new translation or anything like that. And that's a shame, because Gregory of Tours is someone that you would like. You read him, and even though he's harping and he's chasing his own red herrings, you end up liking this author. Especially if in passages like that one, though, like the ones that I read you detect a twinkle in his eye. It's entirely possible that that twinkle was there, and that would just make him all the more adorable. If he's presenting these absurd stories, knowing that there's an element of absurdity in them, wanting you to laugh while you're reading this book as well as be interested, then all the more. I've loved him anyway, but I'm always on that kind of a Heisenberg uncertainty principle about whether or not he's in complete earnest and we just find him funny, or whether or not he knows, is in on his own joke. It's up to you to decide. But one way or another, I recommend the book. And despite the occasional creaks in that translation, this one by Lewis Thorpe is not bad. Again, I think it's beggars can't be choosers. I'm pretty sure that you can get a bilingual version of this where the translation would be even more wooden. But this isn't bad at all. So your Penguin Classic for today is a recommend. and this is Friday, so there's a chance, once again, there's a chance that there will be no Daily Penguins this weekend. Just to warn you, I will try, especially since we need our Daily Penguins now more than ever. But if just want to warn you, just in case it doesn't happen. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but we'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.